everyone. As promised, we are kicking off Emmy season this week. Whether you realize it or not, it is already in full swing. There are big prestige TV shows premiering. There are speculative lists about the best supporting actress in a drama series race. And we here at The Ankler are once again wondering what all of this means about the current state of television and the people who make it, both what you see on the screen and the process that goes into it. So this week, I'm joined by The Ankler's own Elaine and Manori Ravindran, two of the authors of the series business column about how television actually gets made. We'll earmark what seem like some of the most promising shows of the Emmy race and also the biggest contenders we might have already seen, as well as the overall TV trends that explain how this race is taking shape. I am Katie Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. Elaine and Manori, thank you so much for joining me to talk about a part of your business that I don't think you guys normally have to think that much about. Like, when I tell you it's Emmy season going on, are you like, okay, wait a second, what? Or is it something that kind of looms over your head when you have these conversations with people who are actually trying to get television made?
Okay, I'm not going to lie. Every time people talk about Emmy season, I have to go and Google, when does the eligibility period end? This is every year.
I mean, not now is the answer, which is why it's kind of crazy to be talking about it in March.
It's like May 31st, right, Katie?
Yeah, and we should say, for anyone who is not reading series business, which everyone should, Manori, you cover it from the UK and the European side of things, which we'll get into this later, but they're really, Emmy season takes place in LA. It's so far from where you are, but there's so much overlap there, right? Between like the people you're talking to trying to launch these international shows and the Emmy attention that I think does benefit them, even if it feels very distant.
Yeah, definitely. It seems to sort of ebb and flow, and there are some interesting sort of factors as well that we can kind of get into later. But certainly it's become a lot more important, I would say, in recent years, especially like some years ago when shows like The Crown were still ongoing and you saw like huge blitzes of British talent kind of dominate the Emmys. I remember one year in particular, it was just like astounding how many British actors were actually winning Emmys, right? And also it speaks to UK talent being represented by all of the big agencies now and having a lot more of those opportunities. And it's all sorts of things, but we can get into it.
Yeah. This is not a TV show, but during the Oscar season, I saw the people from Conclave a couple times, and they would be at these award shows, like all very like polite and in being very nice and knowing lots of people in the room, but also having this vibe of like, this is all kind of crazy and we got to go back to work. Like they seem to have their head on their shoulders, and maybe that's a very useful influence that the UK talent can bring into these award seasons.
Yeah, definitely. I think like sometimes people are really sort of shell shocked, but I mean, Peter Strawn, that's an interesting case, right? Because like,
oh my God, yeah,
he's the writer.
So nice and so baffled by all of it.
So baffled, but I wonder if like Wolf Hall could have a little bump, right? I mean, they had a huge Emmys run, I think, when it first premiered, like however many years ago, a long time ago.
A while ago.
So that'll be interesting to see, I think.
Yeah, I wrote about that when I was writing in my newsletter about what this year's Oscar winners are going to be doing next. Like he wrote Wolf Hall, which is premiering in the U.S. on PBS in April, I think. So, the limited series race we'll get to, it is weirdly empty. But before we get too far down the rabbit hole of like specific shows, just to talk to you guys generally, as you were saying before, you're always so focused on development and how these shows are getting made. And sometimes that's a 2, 5, 10-year roadmap for getting from actually developing a show to actually being on the air. So maybe to start with you, Elaine, like when you look at this list of shows that are eligible for Emmys this year, does this resemble the TV landscape that people are telling you about? Are these all weird outliers, or does it make sense to you that this is kind of what rises and actually gets made?
Well, you have your sort of your big ones, right? Where it's like, okay, this is an outlier and it's done well. And of course, I'm talking about The Bear, which is that show where it's just like people say they don't want the dramedies or the sadcoms or the sort of not traditional comedies. They don't want like the auteur-driven stuff right now. That's not what buyers are looking for. But what has been dominating the Emmys? The Bear. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's a little bit of a case of like, we've talked about this before. Like, it's like a dying star, right? Like, you're seeing the light from this star from, like, many years ago, like this thing that was in development. But, like, I don't really know how much of a predictive case it is for, like, what buyers want next. Like, everybody I've talked to, the networks, the streamers, when I'm like, okay, The Bear's winning big. Do you want another The Bear? And they're like, The Bear would not get bought today. It would only, it's a John Landgraf special. That's how this kind of stuff happens.
That's what they said about Shogun, too, right? Which comes, like, right after you were reporting about how nobody wanted historical shows. It's like, oh, but
which
everyone
is one of those shows
Shogun.
that That had a 10-year gestation period. You want to talk about a long development? That was not a 2-year track. That thing was in development for forever. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I mean, I think it looks kind of along the lines of what people are looking for, like escapist stuff, things that are, you know, I think sci-fi always does well. Like you look at something like Severance, which, I mean, considering the break it had between its seasons, seems to be getting a lot of pickup, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then there are other things like Bridgerton, where it's like, yeah, nobody wants a big period piece right now unless you're Shonda Rhimes and can pull off something this massive. So another outlier.
Yeah, or I have already been a hit. Bridgerton's been on since, what, like 2018 or like that?
Yeah.
So there's it gets grandfathered in some way. Yeah, what about you, Manori? What do you hear about that people actually want that is in this Emmy season?
I mean, just kind of having a look at some of these, and I do actually watch a lot of these shows despite being in the UK and watching a lot of British drama, but, you know, something that really...
There's British dramas in here too.
There are, very, very true. You know, very true. I did notice that there are very few sort of truly original ideas, right? Like when you look at sort of the biggest contenders in drama, like something like Black Doves, which I think is an original idea by Joe Barton, for example, and I think Paradise as well, are some of the only sort of really original concepts. Like a lot of it is based on pre-existing IP, right? Like Andor, The Boys, Day of the Jackal, Last of Us. I mean, The Pit, could you argue? Because that was meant to be like an ER sort of revival, right? Or something like that, from what I understand.
Apparently there's scandal behind The Pit, which I don't know if that's something you guys will end up reporting on, about how there was supposed to be an ER revival and then they decided not to make it, or it fell apart, and then instead The Pit, starring Noah Wyle, emerges. And I don't know, how much can you really say that like a hospital drama is something that you own?
So true. No, definitely. But then also like Slow Horses, right? It's based on a number of the McCarran books, which I think actually there's still a number to go through. So that'll probably be back as well. And then, of course, like returning shows, Squid Game, White Lotus, Severance. So it is interesting. I always like when you see sort of original ideas, but it is something that we sort of see where it is usually based on kind of pre-existing, you know, IP. And that's something that we kind of see year in and year out.
Yeah. How IP heavy does this year look for you, Katie, compared to past years?
You know, I'm looking over it and I realized I hadn't really even thought of something like The Handmaid's Tale, I guess, is IP technically, but like it's been on the air for so long that it kind of feels like its own thing. Or even like The Day of the Jackal, like I think that title kind of helps it sell. It's like a remake of this movie, this book series, but like it kind of stood on its own. Like it wouldn't have succeeded only on being IP. It kind of also had to be good.
Yeah.
So like The White Lotus is original, but it's also kind of its own IP at this point. I just feel like television works differently than movies in some way, where it's like it's pre-sold to maybe get it made, but then it kind of has to like sell itself to be out there, as opposed to like a movie that's like a sequel that like will just make its money on opening weekend and to be done with it. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. And I think about that too sometimes. Like the IP gets your foot in the door, right? Like for the buyer to be like, it's based on this other thing that viewers will recognize, but then it winds up taking on a life of its own. And it's like, I don't know, how many people have read The Handmaid's Tale, right? Like how many people have even read all the Bridgerton books? Like it's become its own thing.
That's true. Yeah. It's not
or
enough.
like looking at like Dying for Sex, like an FX limited series that's going to be coming out in a couple weeks. Like it's based on a podcast and based on a true story, but like I don't know how many people know that podcast ever existed. So like, is the IP thing more important for like developing and getting someone to listen to it, to like listen to your pitch and maybe actually make it, than it is for actually marketing it to an audience? Does that sound right to you guys?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's such a risk aversion, right? And everybody talks about this. It's like we're in an environment where there are hundreds or sometimes thousands of layoffs at the studios. It's a contracting industry. We just came off of still 2 strikes from 2023 that everybody is like very slowly recovering from. So it's like, yeah, you want to go to some IP or some artist who is reliable. And so IP is the thing that gets your foot in the door. And it's just kind of, I don't know, like almost a fun creative Trojan horse if you can like get that in on the basis of IP and then create something really fun and actually kind of original with that as just the beginning thread.
I think it's just like the built-in audience, right? That like you can sort of point to maybe in a pitch meeting and be like, oh, well, this is how it like, you know, has kind of grown, or how the audience has grown for this particular podcast or whatever. But I mean, Dying for Sex looks great. I was looking at I think it's Michelle Williams, right?
Michelle Williams, yeah.
Yeah, that looks excellent. And I would had no idea that was a podcast. It just, I mean, maybe maybe casting also has something to do with this too, right? There are some pretty big players. I mean, thinking of like Day of the Jackal, that series was like, I think it was like £8 million plus for an episode of that, which is astonishing.
I mean, it looks fantastic.
It looks really,
something
really good.
to it.
They spent a lot of money on that, Sky, and obviously with Peacock as well. So
yeah, I mean, and the IP thing, when you look at the Disney shows that are, on my little short list of things that might actually get nominated, something like Andor, which is in the Star Wars universe, or Agatha All Along, which are in the Marvel universe. Like, Disney has made a lot of Star Wars and a lot of Marvel shows that absolutely don't go anywhere. So it's like the more further afield you get from the IP that made it possible to make your show, the better that you wind up, or at least the like more likely for awards contention that you wind up, which I feel like is a promising, like that's a way that these awards can push the industry in a better direction. That it's not just about regurgitation, it's about pushing that idea forward somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about Andor, we can talk about these shows kind of category by category. So we can start with drama. Andor, I do think, is a really interesting question mark about, a show that got more Emmy attention than was expected in its first season and is now coming back a little bit stronger. But to me, and I wrote about this in my newsletter, and I want to see if you guys agree, and I don't think this is just recency bias, but like Severance and The White Lotus feel like they're like duking it out for all of the attention in this category, and everyone else, like including shows like The Last of Us, which still have yet to premiere, might have to follow in their footsteps. Are you guys sensing the White Lotus Severance mayhem that I am in my own feeds? I see you nodding, Manori. Follow up on it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like Fridays and White Lotus, basically, because I'm in the UK, we watch it on Mondays here.
Do people like skip work on Monday morning to watch the White Lotus? Like, how does that work with the time zones?
I do not know anyone who's actually skipped work. I mean, potentially maybe somebody's very cheekily working from home with an eye on the recent White Lotus. That is not me. I promise, Janice. I'm watching it in the evenings. But yeah, no, I mean, I have to say, like, just that kind of like double whammy of like the Friday, Monday hit of those two shows has been, and the fact that it's like a weekly release has been excellent. It's something to get you through, the last of winter, basically. And yeah, I think it's been excellent.
Elaine, are you reading all the theories on the Reddit boards for both of these? There's so many.
Okay, I'm gonna out myself here as not having ever seen an episode of The White Lotus, which I know is like a crime against television reporting. How are you going on
mental vacations? Like, where is your fantasy travel now if it's not watching the White Lotus?
Okay, but like I do see it. It feels so saturated right now with the headlines, and I can't tell if this is just like because we're in the bubble of reporting about it. But it's like, yeah, it's just everywhere. And the same thing for Severance. Like I said, for a show that had such a long time between seasons, I mean, either their marketing campaign is excellent or the show itself is also really picking up just that much traction that everybody's talking about it, or at least it feels like everybody's talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the mystery shows, the puzzle box shows, the lost kind of like what's in the hatch thought process, like I don't think there's enough shows like that out there right now. And like there have been a lot of, lost imitators in the last 20 years. So plenty of them go by the wayside and aren't actually that good. But, like Yellow Jackets had that power in its earlier seasons. And I feel like a lot of that has waned when they haven't really been able to like follow through on some of those mysteries. But just like having something you want to speculate about, even the White Lotus has this with like, the show of death in the beginning of the season. Mm-hmm. And so you get to speculate about that. That level of engagement, I think, is such a powerful way for a show to recover from a long break like that.
Definitely. Don't you find though, Katie, with Severance, I have found myself astonished by the premium nature of it and the production design, and just the story is so captivating. And yet I have felt this sense of frustration that it never picks up where it's sort of the last episode has left off, right? Up until these last two episodes, obviously last week, and then the finale, I am assuming this week as well, which I'm hoping to God gives us some answers, but there's been so much backstory.
Yeah, by the time people hear this, they will have revealed everything in the finale. So hopefully we're all very happy with what gets shown.
For sure. I'm definitely ready for a little bit more payoff, because I feel like we've all been very patient, and I still have absolutely no idea what Lumon does or what this, what the goats are about or anything like that. I feel like I have more questions than answers. And yet I guess the power of that show is that I'm still completely engrossed. Like every Friday I'm there. I want to know, how this thing is going to end. So yeah, definitely the puzzle box shows certainly something to that for sure.
Katie, do you feel like weekly releases play into the awards conversation, like with any significance, like versus the binge watch? Like, do you feel like that it keeps the show in the conversation long enough where it has a real impact?
I feel like it can help your show grow, right? Like it can help an audience feel like it's building around it. Like The White Lotus, I think, gets a ton of power by airing week to week. Severance being the same way. That like something like Black Doves, a show that like Elaine, I know you and I love. Manori, I hope you also watch Black Doves. Oh my God, yeah, I feel like
Black
if you live
Doves
in London,
fan club right here.
Yeah, we'll sing its praises. But like something like that, like we all kind of slowly discovered it and told our friends about it. But there's not that like collective energy. Like we don't have Twitter the same way we used to, but like there are ways to just like get into the swing of a show. I mean, by the time people are voting for awards, it's usually months later. So like it might be on your radar in a different way. But I just feel like in terms of like sensing fan enthusiasm, people want to vote for a winner. They want to vote for something that people really like. So it just, don't you feel like if Black Doves had aired week to week, like it debuted on Netflix in December, like it would have been even more fun for us to like convince all of our friends to watch it?
Totally. I mean, that's how I feel about shows like Bridgerton as well, where it's like these shows that are so buzzy. And I know that one released in like 2 drops, basically. But it's like...
and like almost a year ago. Like it's been out for so long.
Yeah. Like, isn't only the back half of the last season eligible in this Emmy cycle? Because like the first 4 episodes came out in like May, early May. And then the second half came out in like June. But it's like, how do you keep a show like that in conversation where it was a binge drop on the border of Emmy eligibility, and it was a year ago, right?
I mean,
it's a huge show.
It might also be them saying like, hey, we have other things we want to prioritize in the awards race, so maybe it's not essential.
But 100% on Black Doves. Like, I think a weekly release would have kept that in the conversation longer. I mean, I've done my part. I've seen it twice already over, so.
Well, and that show and Day the Jackal are among those. I was going to ask you, Manori, like I feel like they're both bigger in the UK than they are here, and it's hard to know what that means for Emmy voting. Like the Emmys are international in their own way, maybe not quite like the Oscars, but like are those shows like even bigger phenomenons than I realize?
I feel like The Jackal was definitely pretty big here for sure. I think because we've been waiting for Sky to come up with a really big original, right? They've been sort of toying with sort of the scripted original strategy for the last 5 or 6 years, and we still hadn't seen that really big show since Chernobyl, arguably, which was probably a bit more HBO than Sky in terms of the funding and the creative for that. But I think there was a lot of love for Day of the Jackal here for sure. Probably maybe more marketing spend as well, quite frankly, by Sky. I mean, they certainly threw everything at it. With Black Doves, it was big here too because Joe Barton has a really good rep here. He did Gary Haji and, a number of other things.
I just started watching that show last night, by the way.
Gary Haji?
Yeah, so stylistic.
That's the one that has Will Sharp of The White Lotus season 2, who, if you're watching that show, I guess you should also watch The White Lotus, Elaine, because he's great on The White Lotus.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, he's great.
The versality of Will Sharp. I mean, the fact that he's actually a director as well. And I mean, his character, Rodney on Gary Haji, is just like, it's so he's excellent and in a real pain. And yeah, big fan of Will Sharp. But yeah, I think Black Doves arguably probably was a little bit bigger here. It's interesting about the weekly drop. I wonder about that show. I also think about social media as well, and something like White Lotus, which has this really young cast. And I've been noticing that a lot of them are sort of doing these kinds of behind the scenes photo drops like every week in a line with like aligning it with.
Like you wonder if that's coordinated?
Yeah, I'm sure it is, to be honest, because it really kind of is like, it almost seems like based on the episode. And then you see like the behind the scenes, like the full moon party, which of course I'm excited to watch tonight. But those are the photos that I was seeing basically last night when I was looking at.
Oh, so you're getting spoilers via Instagram of an episode you haven't been able to watch yet? Oh, that's unfair.
Oh no, I mean I don't mind, but it's kind of interesting because it's sort of like, I guess if you have like a big ensemble cast like that and sort of something that really helps kind of keep the momentum of a weekly drop, it makes a lot of sense.
Another show I was going to point out on the weekly drop question, which you mentioned earlier, The Pit, which is like a Max drama. And I feel like the constant thing, and Elaine, you might be able to have a better perspective on this. Like when a show debuts on Max, you're like, oh, did HBO just like decide they don't care about it that much? And then sometimes it's Hacks, which is like a huge hit. So it doesn't mean anything about quality. But I feel like The Pit was something as everyone's like, okay, another hospital drama. And then week by week, more and more people have been like, this is so intense, but you got to watch it. Like the show has like me like completely wrapped up. Elaine, is the American perspective, like, is the Max thing like just still a bizarre division? Is there any purpose to this that they can read into what these shows are?
So funny you mentioned that. When HBO and Max, however you want to call it, HBO and Max, like did their big slate presentation last fall with Casey Bloys and a room full of reporters, I asked him, I said, what's the distinction between a Max show and an HBO show? A question I'm sure they're tired of hearing by now, but one that everybody still has.
They created it for themselves.
But it's a real question, right? Because it's like, what makes The Pitt not an HBO show? And for that show specifically, it sounded like his response, to paraphrase it, it sounded like he said, basically, like, that's a show where, you know, there's a more contained budget. The set piece is obviously sort of there. It follows the template of a more traditional hospital procedural. And it sounded like it's something that in success they would look to do, where you can get a bigger audience for a lower budget, where you don't have to sort of have like, it be like a prestige HBO show that still does well. So I think that's sort of their distinction there. And then, like, I've heard in the past that Max tends to be a little more female skewing in their viewership and what they're targeting. But I mean, yeah, which is interesting when you have a show like The White Lotus, which I'm sure has a huge, you know, audience of women. Yeah. But yeah, there are these sort of minor distinctions that I would doubt the American consumer cares about. But we obviously care about in great detail.
Well, it's just extremely hard to know. Like, you know, when I open my screener app, like they have it organized by HBO and Max. I have to remember which is on which. But if you're just opening the Max app, you're going to get all of it there. Like, I just can't imagine who cares so much about it at this point.
But with The Pitt itself, it's like that's such an intense show that, like, can you imagine that one being a binge watch? Like, I have a friend who works in the ER and she was like, I can't watch this show because it's too realistic.
Oh, I have a friend who works in an ER who's like, we love the show because it's so realistic. And I was like, I am so over. I cannot imagine like clocking out from that job and then going home and watching it. Like, that just sounds so stressful. But I guess doctors really love it. I mean, so before we move out of the drama category, like you were talking about budget, Elaine, and it's like worth mentioning a lot of these shows we're talking about. Andor, Day of the Jackal, we talked about the budget behind it. House of the Dragon is in there. That's super lavish. The Last of Us, I presume they're going to spend a lot of money. Severance, White Lotus, I guess, is like fairly cheap, actually, because they're just filming at a already existing luxury hotel. But it does feel like money really helps you rise to the top of it. And it's not a foolproof thing. We all know about shows that they spend a fortune on. But, you know, I assume you guys talked to a lot of people in development where money is really hard to come by. Like, do you think that everyone is just saving their money to spend on the stuff they know is a sure thing? Like, does it make them more likely to greenlight expensive things when things like this do well? Like, do you think this has any correlation with the budgets that happen for people?
Nobody wants to. No exec out there right now wants to put their head on the chopping block by greenlighting something super expensive that, you know, is a big swing. Even if it's creatively a big swing, might be a miss. And that's kind of the problem right now, right? Like, everybody wants the big swing. They want the big risk, but they don't actually want any of the downside. They only want the upside. And that's just not how that works, you know? You can't take a gamble on a show without assuming there's some downside involved. And it makes it really tough. It makes everybody's jobs really tough, from the writers and the showrunners to the creative execs at the studios. And, you know, for the marketing people too, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, development is my story this week, which has just gone out, tackles this a little bit. But ultimately, you know, development used to have huge teams sort of working on ideas, right? They were like the main ideas engines of the industry. And a lot of that money has just been sort of whittled down, right? The money that used to go into, at least I'm talking a bit more about the UK system here, but like into funded development. And a lot of that is based on the commissions you get. The more commissions you get, the more money you have for development. But when the commissions sort of dwindle and, you know, you're not getting as many of them, the pot of money that you have for development also is just non-existent, right? And so we're seeing teams get smaller and people having to be a lot more laser focused on what it is, the ideas that they are developing. And also what I found really interesting, having more people from production coming onto development teams and having a real mix instead of sort of core development people who have never done production, who've only worked in development. And now increasingly they're needing to be a mix because of money ultimately and budgets.
Yeah. And is that because they want to get like a realistic assessment of how something would cost, and that's why they're bringing the production people in earlier?
Precisely. They don't want to waste funds kind of going down certain rabbit holes or pursuing various threads for a story or an idea if it's unscripted that's just unrealistic and not feasible with what a network or a streamer is able to greenlight.
Now, like, not to sound too much like Elon Musk in charge of Doge here, but like, is that like an efficiency that is like, you know, we still get something good on the screen, but it like it saves wasted time in the development process, or do you lose something by streamlining things like that?
I think you do lose something, to be honest, because I think with development, it used to be people's entry point into the industry, especially younger executives or people who are interested in working in TV, and now it's just becoming, it's kind of like fewer, bigger, better, and also fewer, bigger, senior, right? It's more experienced people who are working in TV. Sometimes they go to conferences sort of in the UK or wherever, and it's there are no younger people around. It's a lot of people who are seasoned veterans of this field, and I think development is probably something where we are already starting to see that. It used to be way more junior execs, and now they're just not able to get a foot in the door.
Oh, for sure. I mean, both on the studio side and the creative side, how do you make room for emerging voices and emerging talent when you keep going back to the same few people who have churned out hits for you?
Yep.
It's the same thing with like pilot season too, right? It's like we don't have pilots, so you don't get to see those big swings taken in one episode. You have to be so sure of something that when you order it straight to series, like it has to be a done package deal. Like this thing's going to hit.
Sure.
Yeah. This is Elaine, you had that series talking to Gen Z people, and I'm imagining for the Gen Z voices, none of them have created the shows we're talking about in the Emmy race because the latter is virtually non-existent. But also, these shows, a lot of them aren't going to appeal to people that age either because they're all banking on things that are surefire hit from creators who are in their 40s and 50s. So it kind of creates like a doom loop there.
Yeah, and you hear that a lot too, right? Of like this ceiling where you have the boomers all at the top, and like now you have some Gen Xers and older millennials who are getting frustrated because they're like, when is it my time to shine? So you got to get through that backlog first before you can even think about Gen Z.
Yeah. Well, to pivot from that into talking about the comedy category, there's a lot of big comedy shows that are going to be back that have been kind of hanging out at the Emmys for years and years. Abbott Elementary, The Bear, Hacks, which kind of had the surprise Emmy victory last year, and then Only Murders in the Building, which had the surprise SAG Awards victory, which, believe it or not, feels very telling. But I am so excited for more people to see The Studio, the Apple comedy created by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, his like longtime collaborator, which is about movie development, but is about so many of the things that we were just talking about like talent and what you have to sacrifice and what feels like a safe bet and how you can, talk to a really revered director about how he fucked up the end of his movie. Like it's so much of that inside baseball stuff that you're talking about. Like have either of you guys seen any of The Studio? I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody.
I've seen a trailer for it. It looks absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's almost going to be sort of like, it's so meta in terms of like what so many of us cover. I just don't even understand sort of the process of sitting down to watch the show. I'm very excited for it.
I'm super excited for it. I mean, and Hollywood loves a show about itself too, right? So I'm so interested to see like what all the inside baseball stuff is. I think I read a headline of a story that was like they went around and they were actually like talking to studio heads about their jobs. So I'm interested to see like what sort of things have any basis in reality. I also wonder how it's going to hit though when you have a show like The Franchise, which I had started watching on Max and like I thought was funny and good, and then it got canceled after that first season. That was another very like inside baseball show.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't watch The Franchise. I probably need to watch it to compare and contrast. And it's also interesting how much inside baseball there is in the comedy race this year. Like Only Murders had this kind of LA season where you've got like Molly Shannon playing a studio executive. Hacks is much more of an LA show than it used to be because it's you've got Gene Smart's character Deborah Vance is hosting a late night show. So there's a lot of cameos. There's a lot of like talks about like studios and like ratings and stuff like that. So I don't know like how insidery Emmy voters want to be. Like I guess the answer is probably pretty insidery because you've got this sense of this transition in the Emmy category with The Bear like losing its grip a little bit, that like this ironclad grip that it had for a while. So it feels like it's anybody's ball in some way.
Well, people watch it though. I mean, in terms of wider audiences, that's what I always wonder about shows like this, where it is kind of so industry specific. Just another example is, in the UK, we had Rivals on Disney Plus, which the media absolutely kind of ate up and loved. And it was about sort of, broadcaster that's meant to be like ITV, right? Back in the 80s. And it was just so industry specific and a lot of that inside baseball stuff that people remembered. But then it kind of eked out a second season renewal, but I don't think actually a lot of people kind of just in general watched it. Like that second season renewal was really hard won. And, it wasn't like an automatic green light. And so I don't know, do you guys think that those shows do kind of resonate with sort of the wider, I guess, population in the US, or is it more for awards?
I think people like seeing behind the curtain. I mean, think about how popular Entourage was for so many years. I mean, like I've literally met agents who are like, I became an agent because of Entourage. So wow. I don't doubt it.
Yeah. I mean, I think The Studio makes running a studio seem much more stressful than glamorous, even though like Seth Rogen drives a great car. So I don't know who's going to try to be a studio head as a result of all of that. But yeah, I think the idea of like you can be in on a joke and like, you don't have to have like been a Hollywood executive to know about the Sony hack. So when there's like jokes referencing the Sony hack on the studio, you're like, aha, I get this inside joke on this. But also, I mean, I think it is worth the Emmys asking themselves the questions that the Oscars do year after year of like, are we rewarding shows that people care about? Is anyone going to invest in what we're doing? You know, the Abbott Elementary, I think, is probably undeniably the most popular of the show. I mean, maybe Nobody Wants This. Like, that was like a really huge Netflix hit. I mean, that's a very LA show also, but it's not as entertainment inside baseball. But I think with comedy especially, you get the chance to kind of lean toward things that people actually genuinely like. So I wonder how much of the push for that will be like, don't just do the inside baseball show. Like, you know, if you're on the Abbott Elementary campaign, you might make a case for a show that's like genuinely popular and really good.
That makes me wonder if a show like Running Point has a chance at the Emmys. It's a show that
did it do better than I realized on Netflix?
It's still number 1 in the top 10 right now, so I assume it must be because it came out like at least a week or two ago. So it's holding its own there, and that's a show that like feels very classic, and I say that not like in a euphemistic way, right? But it has this very like old school rom-com feel to it that's been updated for 2025, and I'm just like, oh, like it's comforting and it's new. Like, is it like breaking any molds? No, but like clearly it's resonating with people.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been also curious about The Four Seasons, a Netflix comedy that Tina Fey created that I haven't seen yet. It's coming out in a couple of months, but that also seems like something that like everyone could really watch. I mean, Netflix still, as much as it's kind of a black box about who's actually watching their stuff, like they have the platform to get these things in front of people. So like they have the ability to claim real populism in these things. And I think especially in the comedy category, maybe they have a really strong argument to make this year. We also didn't mention Squid Game in the drama series, which Netflix has. It's still huge, if maybe not as huge as it quite used to be.
Yeah, is Squid Game losing its luster? Like, I know it's huge, and the numbers say it's huge, but like is it getting a little long in the tooth for an Emmy voter, do you think, Katie?
I mean, it's only season 2, so like, God knows.
I know, which is weird. A weird question to ask for season 2, right? It feels like it's been around for a long time.
It does. Well, because I feel like it was like a pandemic big thing. Like, I think it premiered in 2020, so that is a long time.
Oh, really? Is that when the first season was up?
Huh. I think it's 2021, actually.
Okay, but I still remember the world not being normal.
No,
like they definitely won a bunch of Emmys at one of those weird Emmy shows that wasn't a real one. So it was like a little bit of a long time, but it also felt like this kind of bolt from the blue, exciting thing. And it's genre-y, which can always be hard. Like Stranger Things, I think, had a similar trajectory where people were really excited about it, and then it just kind of became taken for granted. I also just feel like fewer people talked about it this time around. Maybe I'm crazy.
I think because of the drop, maybe. Like, again, it was like all in one drop on Boxing Day, and it's Christmas and it's the holidays. And I watched it. We watched it in like a day and a half, and then kind of we did really, really enjoy it. But then you sort of promptly forget about it, right? And you kind of move on to the next thing. Where in the UK, I mean, there was Traitors, and there was all sorts of things for New
Black
Year's.
Doves, the #1 show in the world.
There you go, Black Doves. That was big. But yeah, I wonder maybe because also we didn't have any sort of resolution, right? The second batch of Squid Game is out later this year, so perhaps that's part of it too.
Yeah, like the Bridgerton thing again, where you're like, you don't know when you're supposed to consider it a complete project. Well, while we're talking about Netflix, I wanted to get to limited series at the end of this. And then, Manori, this is a question for you because Netflix is going so all in on Adolescence, which just premiered on Netflix. Did it premiere earlier in the UK, or is it also new in the UK for you guys?
No, I believe it was last Thursday, right? March 13th.
Okay, yeah. It's this limited series created by Stephen Graham and Jack Thorne and starring Stephen Graham, who's like, one of those actors you kind of have just seen in a million things, whether or not you clock it. And it's like, I've watched one episode. I was really bracing myself. It's like the grimmest stuff imaginable, where it's about this 13-year-old boy who's been accused of a horrible murder. And it's all done in like what appears to be single take. So it's this really gripping, like sort of like The Pit in some way, where you're just like plunged into the middle of something and it's really hard to look away. And so it's not at all the obvious thing you would think of Netflix, home of Squid Game and Bridgerton, being like, yes, everyone's going to talk about this, but they're so high on it. I do think it's gotten a big bump. And Manori, another question like for you is like, is this even bigger in the UK? Like, is it really turning into a phenomenon? Like it feels like it is here?
It is absolutely massive in the UK right now. It's a show that everyone's talking about. I also had a look at Ted Sarandos's Instagram, and like it's on the grid, I mean, how often does he basically put something on the grid? It's on the grid, which I weirdly, being from here, I was like, oh, look at that, it's so great.
You're like hometown pride.
hometown pride for this show. And also because Philip Barantini, I've kind of followed his career. Boiling Point was a huge movie. About
he's the director of every episode?
He is the director of every episode, exactly.
Yeah.
And sort of like the one take kind of technique that he uses. That was something that we saw in Boiling Point, the film, which was also about this chaotic kitchen. I think it actually predated The Bear, maybe it came out around the same time as The Bear. And then the BBC turned it into a TV show as well, which I believe he was also part of. But he's been around for some time, and to see him really take things up with Adolescence, which Brad Pitt, by the way, is an executive producer on, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible to see the show really break through in this way. And it's also quite telling that Netflix UK really seems to have, I mean, Baby Reindeer came out around this time last year. And obviously look at how well that did at the Emmys.
Yep.
And to see them have this sort of entry every spring, hopefully, is really, really interesting. And I think what's telling, I think, about these two shows as well, because we've also had Toxic Town, which is another big British drama here, also written by Jack Thorne, which has been huge here. It's about this toxic waste scandal in a town called Corby, a British town where basically mothers who had babies around this time, the babies all had various deformities, and there was a big case, and the council was found liable for having toxic waste that affected pregnant women around that time. So anyway, it's sort of I think on the back of Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, which was another really big sort of the post office scandal drama of last year.
What an incredible title for a show.
I know.
Versus the Post Office.
It actually got the law changed. Like, I mean, they literally had, like, it went to like the highest levels of government in this country. So I think on the back of that last year, we're seeing a few more of these sort of real life dramas. But the big difference between something like Toxic Town on Netflix, which again, as I say, was by Jack Thorne, and Adolescence, is that Toxic Town is just, it's such a UK story, you know what I mean? And I don't think it has the universal sort of resonance that something like Adolescence does, where it doesn't matter. Of course, it is so British, and I'm not going to lie, I had to turn on my subtitles for some of the Liverpudlian accents, which I often do in this country. But ultimately, there are some universal themes that I think anybody watching anybody anywhere in the world can really relate to. So it's quite interesting to see what resonates out of the UK.
I will add that Toxic Town is on Netflix US, although I hadn't heard of it, and features Amy Lee Wood, who the world has fallen in love with on The White Lotus, the like best character on the show, I think. So definitely going on my list for that. Elaine, like hearing Manori talk about these shows that have like real social import and change the laws and do things, it feels like Netflix UK is like operating in a different universe than so much of Hollywood, where all of those things
I was like,
sound
none
like
of the shows I watch do anything like that.
or none of the shows that they're like, it's not sexy enough, or it's too serious or something like that. Like, is Netflix UK just getting away with something and then having shows that are hits, maybe proving that people actually want to watch these shows? Like, how are these two arms of Netflix all working like this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm so kind of removed from the UK side of things. Like, Manori would be able to better speak to that. But I do wonder, especially if the success of Baby Reindeer last year has sort of opened people's eyes to that part of that company.
I mean, I should just say as well, to be fair, there is sort of this battle that's happening in the UK right now, right? Where, to be fair, Mr. Bates was actually ITV. It wasn't Netflix, but obviously Baby Reindeer, Adolescence, Toxic Town, these are Netflix UK shows. But there is this real worry here, and I was going to sort of mention this as well, but in terms of how we're funding scripted drama in the UK, which is a huge source of anxiety, and I feel like I write about it basically every week. But ultimately, a lot of the British broadcasters, they need international funding to get their dramas made. And obviously, the US used to bankroll a lot of that through these co-productions, when we simply are seeing, a lot less of them. Like, it's really not the same at the same level that it used to be. You occasionally see like BBC, HBO link ups or the occasional thing with like a Sundance TV or whatever, but it's really not at the level that these guys used to operate on, like, even 5 years ago. So for that reason, people are really worried that a lot of these domestic, really important social impact stories are kind of going to go away, because a lot of the broadcasters are just saying, well, we want to tell relevant stories for Britain, but we just can't finance them because it's so expensive to film anything in the UK. And then if you have international money, what does that mean for the story, right? Because Americans, it needs to be relevant to America as well, right? It needs to be more universal.
We take over everything.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think people are like becoming a lot more realistic in terms of financing now, but it is going to have an effect on the kinds of stories that you'll see in the future, I think.
Yeah. I mean, just looking at the shows that we have, like, I think The Pit, like, does a good job of, like, talking about, like, real issues facing, like, American medical system and, like, people living in the real world. But, like, otherwise, it's like paradise set in some weird fictional bunker, like The Last of Us. Like, you know, there's kind of this like cynicism and the despair that's filtering through all of this, but like nothing being made in the US really feels like it's at all socially concerned in the same way as these UK shows. And so I'm like grateful that they exist and they're coming to the US because we have more international platforms now, but also like, why can't we get it together? Why won't Hollywood do anything close to this? Well, guys, as we wrap this up and as we head into the vast Emmy season ahead of us, it will be about 6 months before the Emmy Awards. So buckle up. We have a long way to go.
This is phase one, right?
This is not even phase one.
It's like pre-phases.
Yeah, we're in like pre-phase one somewhere. But it's time to. I have a pile of screeners to get to, which tells you it's beginning. But just personally, like, what are you guys rooting for? What's like a drama, a storyline that has you captivated, a show that you really care about, maybe other than Black Doves? I feel like we've gone down that road. Like, what will keep you invested for the next 6 months?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I know we've just spent I feel like I've talked about the show, but I think Adolescence is really astonishing. I think that's a great contender for Netflix UK. It ticks all the boxes, and it's just to have Stephen Graham, who really is a national treasure, sort of in the spotlight with something like this that has this global resonance is very special. So I hope I personally will be rooting for Adolescence. I know Netflix is going to give that a tremendous push. Also, I'm not going to lie, but Day of the Jackal is something, you know, that was my favorite show last year. I think Sky did a fantastic job, and Peacock, I should say, but it was nice to see them have a home run with that. I thought it was really gripping. Just, you know, I think I was actually on my honeymoon when we somehow we through a VPN or something managed to watch the finale, because I was like, I've got to watch this. I have to know what happens. And I hadn't seen the film.
That's very globe-trotting Day of the Jackal. You're hacking into the mainframe so you can watch the Day of the Jackal
sat in on a beach in Sri Lanka, like trying to access this. It was great. But yeah, I'm rooting for Day of the Jackal as well. I love Eddie Redmayne. I mean, like, you know, he's somebody who we saw in so countless period, you know, dramas effectively. Just to see him in something contemporary like this, knock it out of the park. Lashana Lynch, just a great cast. So I'll be rooting for Day of the Jackal too.
I'll say I talked to Eddie Redmayne on this podcast a couple months ago when the show first premiered, and it was like one of the more relatable things where he had just gotten his kids to bed and he was solo parenting. He was like, okay, I hope they don't wake up. And like, I feel like Elaine, you and I have had those moments recording these podcasts many times. So if that's a reason to root for Eddie Redmayne, then I'll go with that too.
A multitasking dad. We love to see it.
All right, Elaine, what's your rooting interest?
Okay, outside of Black Doves, I really loved Agatha all along, and I wonder if it's going to get overlooked at the Emmys just because it came out a while ago, and I think that one was a weekly. Yeah, that one was a weekly, and so that one was interesting. But I don't feel like it had the sort of staying power that WandaVision did, its predecessor, a few years ago, because that was like peak pandemic when it came out, and that one really gripped everyone. That was kind of like the first Marvel TV series.
I think it was literally the first. It wasn't supposed to be. It was like a weird fluke of the pandemic, but yeah, it was such a phenomenon.
Yeah, and I feel like Agatha really has a lot of that same DNA, obviously, and like is so much heart, and like Patti LuPone and like Catherine Hahn were just amazing on that. And I hope it doesn't get overlooked just, you know, on the pure basis of like how long ago it came out, because I thought that especially for like a Marvel show, I think to like have that kind of nuance and depth and everything. I don't know. I'm rooting for that, which it sounds like, it feels like I'm rooting for David, even though Marvel is technically Goliath.
That's true. I will say I have no idea what kind of precursor this is, but I was at the Publicist Guild Awards that happened right before the Oscars, and the Agatha All Along team won for Best Campaign for a TV Show. So,
okay.
There's some voting block for them. I don't know how many publicists are Emmy voters, but it's in there. I'll throw out before we wrap this up, I do think the comedy race is just one of the more interesting competitive ones. It's really hard to see how it will go. And I love that Only Murders won that SAG award, and Selena Gomez gave the speech and she said, we never win, which is totally true. They've just like had some kind of behemoth they were overshadowed by every time. And I would just love, like, that show has been so consistent. I think that Steve Martin and Martin Short are just like among the funniest people who ever lived. And I would love for some combination of them to finally get their due. There's so much to root for.
In what world are they the underdog is what my question is. Like, that's wild.
Yeah. Well, and like Martin Short and Meryl Streep dating, like, I don't think that hurts. Like, that has us all very invested. So don't you want to see Meryl thanked from the stage at the Emmys?
100%.
Well, thank you guys. Everyone who's listening should subscribe to Series Business if they haven't already. And we will rely on you to tell us everything that's coming in 2 to 3 years so that we'll be able to predict the Emmys in 2030, something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Thanks again, guys. That does it for today's episode. This podcast is edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-hosts, 2 of the authors of the Series Business newsletter, Manori Ravindran and Elaine Lowe. Subscribe to the Prestige Junkie newsletter as well as Series Business at theankler.com, and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.